All right, so we're undoing multiplication by finding two numbers that multiply to something and add to something else with our trinomial. Today we're just going to have a equals 1. All right, so we're good so far. Let's take a look at some examples setting these things up and doing this factoring. That's really all I'm going to do today is several examples. All right, so we want to factor x squared plus 9x plus 20. Now what I usually do, that's A, that's B, that's C. So A is 1. A times C is 20. And we need A times C pretty much every time we do factoring. In this case, A times C is 20. Now the way I learned this, the old school way, without the crosses, without the boxes, and when I was in school they never taught us about any of that stuff. The way we think about this is, well, we know we're going to have two parentheses. And the only way that I can get x squared when I multiply the first things in my parentheses for the FOIL is I have to have an x and an x. X times x is x squared. When A is 1, our parentheses are always going to look like this, x and x as the first thing. And then I think to myself, well, what are two numbers that multiply to 20 and somehow add to 9? That's what our sheet is for, is to help us think of this. So here's the factors of 20. 1 and 20, yes?
Isn't it 5 and 4?
Yes, it is 5 and 4. But if you're not sure, this is how I would go about it to help you out. 2 and 10, 3 doesn't go into 20, 4 and 5. That's the one. 4 times 5 is 20, and 4 plus 5 is 9. So this is going to be a plus 4 and a plus 5. And our factor sheet is to help us with this part. So this is how I learned to do this. The cross and the box are just ways to help us organize this process of finding these numbers and putting them in the right place with the parentheses. Now another thing that I think about here is, well, if 20 is positive, the only way that I can get a positive number when I multiply things together is if both of these are positive or both of these are negative. But if both of these were negative, I'd have negative 4 and negative 5. That adds to negative 9. So I know when both of these are positive, these factors have to be a plus and a plus. That's how I pick out those two signs. Well, let's see how we set up the cross here. The cross is just a way to help us keep this organized. Up here goes the 20. Down here goes the 9. And I'm thinking I want that multiply to 20 and add to 9. And then I would go through the same process, figuring out what two things multiply to 20 and add to 9 somehow. And we figured out those two things are 4 and 5. So from here, when A is 1, I can go ahead and set up my parentheses, x plus 4, x plus 5. So the cross is just a way to help us organize this process. Now let's set up the box. The box will come in more useful, or especially useful, when A is not 1. We'll set up the box. So in this upper corner, we have whatever's here, x squared. In this corner goes the number that's here. We find our factors, 4 and 5. So I'm going to put a 4x here and a 5x there. We put the factor with the x. And now we're going to go through the process of finding our greatest common factor for each row and each column. So what we're going to do for the greatest common factor is here, I'm going to say, what's the biggest number that goes into both 4 and 20? 5 doesn't go into 4, so it has to be a 4. And what's the smallest exponent on x that's these two share? Well, this one doesn't have an x, so there's no x here. This is x to the 0, so we don't have an x there. We do the same thing for this row. What's the biggest number that goes into both 1 and 5? 1. What's the smallest exponent that these two share? X, the x to the first power. So I put an x there. Then I do this column. Biggest number that goes into both 1 and 4? 1. The smallest exponent that's the same on both of these? X. Biggest number that goes into both 5 and 20? 5. So this tells me that in my parentheses goes x plus 5 times x plus 4, whatever is out here. And I can always check my work by multiplying this out. If I multiply this out, if I FOIL this, well, here's the box of how we would multiply these two. So the box that we do is kind of the reverse of using the box for multiplication. But x times x gives me x squared. X times 5 gives me 5x. X times 4 gives me 4x. 4 times 5 gives me 20. I add those all together, and I get back to here. All right, let's take a look at another one. Any questions there? Now for these easier ones where the numbers are pretty small, if you can see this part without doing the cross, or without, that's okay. The cross in the box and writing out the factors is just a way to help us keep that process organized. And when a is not 1, and when our numbers get bigger, these things are very, very helpful. Okay, let's look at another one. X squared minus 6x plus 8. We want to factor this. So here's the first thing that I think. Well, the 8 is positive, and we know we have two numbers that are multiplying to give us positive 8. So those either have to be both positive. Positive times a positive gives me a positive, or both negative. And they're adding to be negative 6. So the only way I can get a negative when I add these two together is if both the numbers that I pick here are negative. So my factors have to be negative and negative. That's the only way I can multiply to get a positive and add to get a negative. So old school way, I would say, well, this has to be, my parentheses have to be x and x. And I think what two numbers multiply to 8 and somehow add together to give me negative 6. Well, let's list the factors of 8. 1 times 8. 2 times 4. Oh, look at that. Isn't negative 2 minus 4 negative 6? Yes? So this is going to have to be negative 2 and negative 4. So that's how I learned how to do it back in the dinosaur days. We can use the cross in the box to help us keep this organized. So the cross, what I'm going to put in here is 8. We want our numbers to multiply to 8. I'm going to put here the negative 6. We want them to add to negative 6. That's when we look at our factors here. And I say, well, this has to be a negative 2 and a negative 4. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. Negative 2 plus negative 4 is negative 6. We can set up our parentheses from there. If we want to set up our box, I put x squared here. I put 8 here. I find my factors. I'm going to put a negative 2x and a negative 4x. And then I find my greatest common factors. What's the biggest number that goes into 4 and 8? 4. And I have a negative here. So I'm going to put a negative 4. Biggest number that, and they don't share an x. Biggest number that goes into 1 and 2? 1. And what power of x do these both have? X to the first, the smallest power of x that they both have. Here, biggest number that goes into 1 and 4? 1. Smallest power of x that they both have? X to the 1. Biggest number that goes into 2 and 8? 2. And we have a negative there, so we put a negative. And that tells me my parentheses are x minus 2 and x minus 4. And this box shows us that if we do this multiplication, we get x squared minus 6x plus 8. All right, questions there? Okay, let's look at another one. X squared minus 3x minus 18. So the first thing that I would say is, well, if I'm finding two numbers that multiply to negative 18, the only way that can happen is for one of them to be positive and one of them to be negative. That's the only way we can multiply two numbers and get a negative number. So I know my factors have to be a positive and a negative. And we need them to add to negative 3. So my parentheses have to be x and x. That's the only way I get an x squared. Let's list the factors of 18. That's what your sheet is for, to help you with your factors. So 1 times 18. 2 times 9. 3 times 6. And if you're not sure if these add to negative 3, we try them out. Well, negative 2 plus 9 is 7, and 2 minus 9 is negative 7, so that doesn't work. Negative 3 plus 6 is positive 6. 3 minus 6 is negative 3. So those are the ones that we want to use. And I need the 6 to be negative and the 3 to be positive for me to be able to add and get negative 3. So this, a lot of teachers call this one the guess and check method. I don't like to call it the guess and check method because we're thinking about how the numbers have to work. That's not guessing, that's thinking about numbers. All right, so the cross helps us keep this organized. We want our numbers to multiply to negative 18 and add to negative 3. That's when we go to our list of factors and figure out this has to be negative 6 and positive 3. 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. 3 minus 6 is negative 3. So we can set up our parentheses there. If we use the box method, we'll set up our box. Whatever's here goes up here. Whatever's here goes here. And then we have a factor, an x here, and the other factor, an x there. Start on this row. The biggest number that goes into 6 and 18. 6, and we have a negative here, so we're going to put a negative 6. The lowest power of x that both of these have, x. Here, we have a 1 and a 6, so my number has to be 1. The lowest power of x, x. Biggest number that goes into 3 and 18, 3. And because it's positive, we leave it positive. So x plus 3, x minus 6. All right, questions there? Yes.
Are questions going to ask us to like put it in the box or
The question will just say factor this thing. The box or the cross is to help you keep the process organized. And I know there are a lot of nice math things that will help, that will do this automatically, like photo math. I am going to ask you to show some work somehow. And the reason that we're doing this is sometimes when we're doing math with these things, if we can split it up like this, then a lot of times something will cancel out. Or if we're solving an equation, we might end up with, oh, that if we have this, that tells us that x plus 3 equals 0, or x minus 6 equals 0, and it helps us solve for x. So this is a very important operation that we do in algebra. We'll be factoring basically for the rest of the semester. Factoring and finding x, getting x by itself are the two main things we do in algebra. All right, let's look at one more example that's slightly different. This is one sort of like we saw in our homework the other day. We want to factor x squared minus xy minus 6y squared. Well, this one's a little different because we have x's and y's. But we're going to do the process the exact same way. That's A. That's B. B is -1. And that's C. And I'm not going to do the kind of the old school way because it's a little trickier for this problem. But we're going to set up our cross to help us keep the process of finding the factors organized. Now this is negative, so that tells us that one factor has to be positive and one has to be negative. That's the only way you can multiply two numbers together and get a negative. We're going to put a -6 here, and we're going to get a -1 there. We want our numbers to multiply to -6 and add to -1. So the factors of 6, 1 times 6, 2 times 3. Can we add 2 and 3 somehow and get -1? So 2 minus 3, -1. So this is going to be -3 and 2. If you're not sure, try it out. -2 plus 3 is +1. 2 minus 3 is -1. You can always try out each possibility. So now we're going to set up our box. The box is going to be useful for a problem like this. We can't just do our parentheses on this one as x minus 3 and x minus 2 because we have to deal with this y. So in this box, we're going to put whatever's here. In this box, we're putting whatever's here. 6y squared. In this box, we're going to put one of the factors. And because we have an xy here, we're going to put x and y. And in this box, we're going to put the other factor and an x and a y. And now we're going to find our GCFs, greatest common factors. For this row, biggest number that goes into 2 and -6. 2. What is the Lowest power on any variable that both of these have. They both have a y. This one doesn't have an x, so we can't bring an x out. Now we're going to do this one. The biggest number that goes into 1 and 2 is just 1. The lowest power on either variable that both of these have is an x. They both have an x in them. Oops, I forgot this row. Biggest number that goes into 1 and negative 3 is 1. The lowest power on the variables that both of these share, an x. Now we do this row. Biggest number that goes into both 3 and 6, 3. And because this is negative, we bring a 3 out. Now we need the variables. Lowest power on either of the variables that both of these have, a y. So my parentheses are x minus 3y times x plus 2y. And if we multiply this out, this box shows us we would have x squared. 2xy minus 3xy is negative xy minus 6y squared. What we did with the box here today is more like what we're going to do with the box tomorrow when a is not equal to 1. So finding those greatest common factors is going to be really important when a is not equal to 1. And we'll also learn another technique tomorrow for when a is not equal to 1. So we'll learn a couple of ways to do those. All right, questions? Okay. So this is our kind of our first. It's not a lot of information, but kind of a lot of new ideas. So it might take a little while to kind of digest in your brain. Our homework is in section 8.5. We're on page 515, 10 through 46 even. We'll answer questions on homework